Statements or expressions of opinion in this podcast are those of the guests and hosts and not necessarily those of the State Bar or its editors.
Welcome to Bottom Up, a monthly podcast dedicated to issues and topics of interest to young lawyers in Wisconsin and beyond. I'm Emil Obviagele.
And I'm Kristen Hardy, and we're your hosts. This is the Bottom Up Podcast.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Bottom Up Podcast. It's a beautiful sunny day in August. On the show today, I have a fellow attorney, a giant in the Milwaukee scene, and I would say statewide and nationally, attorney Mark Thomsen. Now,
well, hello. And thank you for the kind compliments.
Okay, I'm a little rusty. It's been a while
but
since
that's all right. Let's just get to it. Let's do the dance.
Well, Mark, your story is one of the most uniquely American story I think I've ever heard, precisely because much of it isn't in many regards. You see, for example, I came to America from Nigeria, right? Now, Mark, you were a white kid born in Nebraska, but you grew up in Nigeria till you were 12, right?
Yep.
All right.
So I was this white kid that came back to the United States in 1966. The number one song was "We're on the Eve of Destruction." My country was in the middle of, the cities were burning up. Mm-hmm. So it was an interesting time to come back. Now,
you grew up, or at least you spent those years in Nigeria, but not just any part of Nigeria, the northern part of Nigeria in the 60s. And for context, Nigeria gained its independence, I believe,
1960.
October 1st, 1960. So in the 60s, you were there before the independence.
I was there before independence.
And your parents were missionaries, I believe?
They were missionaries. My dad was setting up a school in Bukuru, Nigeria, which is just outside of Jos. But we started down on the Benue River, down by Lamordi. So in a hut, no electricity, outhouse, no running water. The first drums I heard were drums with the harmattan, right? Folks, the harmattan it's sort of like the weather is today with the smoke, but it's Sahara's dust. It's a beautiful sunset.
The trade winds from the west to the east, or the east to the west. It's been a while.
It would be sort of southeast.
So just to orient people who may be listening, so Nigeria is a country in West Africa, the most populous black nation on earth.
The richest as well.
And the richest, but also has a unique feature. I think it is probably the only country, or one of the only countries, that is evenly divided 50% Muslim, 50% Christian, right, along geographic lines, right?
Right, and that line is in Jos.
It's in Jos.
Everything north is Muslim, everything south is Christian, and that's right where I lived.
So to bring this back again, right, so you're growing up in Nigeria with your Christian missionary parents in the northern, predominantly Muslim part of Nigeria, pre-independence to post-independence. That must have been, that is a fascinating experience.
Right. Well, and you witnessed the end of the British Empire. That's the thing you really think about. If you would go retail in Jos, it was all British. And this is how the world has changed. You go retail now, it's all Chinese, right? You've been there recently. China is the new power intruding on Africa.
It's interesting, and the reason I say it's interesting is because you have to understand those cultural demarcations between the North and the South, and in terms of how each side lives their lives and their way of lives, is just as foreign to those who live in Nigeria, because I grew up in the South, I was born in the South, as it would have been for anyone today just traveling into Nigeria with no knowledge of it, right? So your parents leave the comforts of Nebraska, right, in the 50s. Nebraska was likely a much more comfortable place to be in than the northern parts of Nigeria, right? And they bring you along. So, at what age? Like, how old were you when you moved to Nigeria?
2.
You were 2.
So my first memories are in Limordi. That's when I was 4. So that's when in terms of culture shock, it was a big deal for my parents. My mom didn't know any language, went over on a freighter, got off the boat, and, fortunately, Nigeria, many, many, many people spoke English because of the British, the imperialists. So they had that. But outside of that, they had to go learn Hausa right away. That's the language of the North.
So, Mark, I have to start here. I spent my childhood in Nigeria as a Nigerian, right? When I came to America, I had to learn about a whole new culture. You're a white kid from Nebraska in northern Nigeria in the 60s. Back then, in the northern parts of Nigeria, there weren't a lot of people who were, at least in that time, who weren't leaving. A lot of people of non-Nigerian descent, a lot of white people, I would say. So going in, that must, especially in a very rural part of Nigeria, what was that feeling of being singled out? Because and the reason I say that is because when you're coming from Nigeria to a place like Wisconsin, at my time when I went to Marquette for undergrad, I think I was one of like 20 black students on campus, and I had a thick accent, right? And so I think experiencing being the other is never, it's sort of the norm for a lot of us. So for you, I'm always curious when the shoe's placed on the other foot. How's that like? How was that like?
I'm going to flip it around a little bit, because I really didn't think about it until I came back to the States when I was 12. And because I always believed that, the world was full of humanity. And it was just people had different colors. I grew up, my friends were Igbo, John and Tomas. And so it was just, I had this privilege of just growing up, and it was just human to human. And that's why I say when I got back in 66, when you just saw black people sprayed and dogs attacking people, it was like, what is happening? And how is it that all these white Americans are treating black Americans less than human? So that's when it hit me, because it wasn't like I felt targeted as a white in Nigeria. They dealt with the Brits, so there was a certain element of white privilege just, walking around. You represented the empire, even though the empire was gone. Nigeria did the transition peacefully, so you didn't have the remnants, and the Brits left. Not like Kenya or South Africa. So it was a different kind of thing. But that culture shock hit me when I got back to the States.
And do you think that wired your brain to see power and social dynamics differently when you came back to America, where you were now suddenly part of the majority? Because that has to be, and I think a lot of people may not understand or may underplay that, right? So you from ages 2 to being in your early teenage years, you're in Nigeria, and then you come back to America in the mid 60s.
Yeah, and America on fire, right? Had a lasting impact.
How did that shape your view on power and social dynamics amongst groups and amongst people?
Living in Nigeria with many, many tribes, all black, taught you right up front that there's tribes all over. There were Fulanis that handled the cows. Igbos were in the south. We left a month, 2 months before the war between,
The Biafran War.
Right? And
Nigeria's Civil War.
Right, exactly. And, I came to the States with the view that it was an unjust war. And, that I knew early on at 12, that life was really complicated and there were a lot of divisions. And then to come back and see it in the States, because I came back and I ended up in Nebraska again in high school, which it was all white. That contradiction in terms of was primarily black and white in America. And I didn't recognize that until I got here. And then it has had a huge impact in everything I've done since.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
Hi, Russell Nicolay here with Nicolay Law, Accident and Injury Lawyers. If you have clients that have been injured, my office would love the opportunity to help them get compensated and get their life back on track. We handle referrals and co-counsel relationships on injury cases all across Wisconsin.
Since 1986, Wilmick has supported Wisconsin's legal professionals with tailored insurance solutions. Backed by a team of legal and risk experts, Wilmick understands the evolving challenges lawyers face as they structure deals, manage risk, and help clients meet business goals. Wilmick's involvement in the legal community ensures trusted, relevant protection for today's legal landscape.
Thank you. And now back to the Bottom Up Podcast.
So you leave this incredibly unique international childhood, and then at 17, you decide you're going to drop out of high school.
Right, high school, that was, my dad was a preacher. He opposed the Vietnam War. The town was very conservative. I had friends. I got, I had a draft card. I had friends that went to Vietnam, came back junkies. I really didn't have much respect for the high school education.
Because that detail about your upbringing has always floored me. Just knowing you, because it always felt like like some rebellion of sorts.
Right. My mother says I was reckless.
So you were rebelling against a lot of things happening at the time.
I like to play football.
Okay.
Everybody was growing their hair long. The coach said, if your hair isn't like butched, you can't play. So I couldn't play football because I grew up my hair. They had a dress code. I got kicked out of school virtually once a week because my hair was maybe half an inch long over my ears. And you laugh now. Everybody in the NFL has long hair, right? They wouldn't let me play with, inch hair over. And Tinker had just been decided, right, for all the lawyers listening, right? Students' First Amendment rights.
Yeah.
And, my dad, to his credit, I came home one day and I said, I'm never going back. And he said, okay. And he went and got a lawyer out of Omaha, Nebraska, ACLU. And behind my back, I didn't even know it, had sat down with the school board. And, they cut a deal. And he said, you never have to go back. Or you get your hair cut one more time, and they wipe out the school dress code. I said, you think about it. I woke up the next morning, cut my hair, and that was the end of the dress code in Blair, Nebraska. Right?
Wow.
Then I quit, and my hair was to my shoulders, so. But I was out of that town.
Oh my God, that's fascinating because I just played that same scenario out with my father in Nigeria, going back and being like, "Hey, Dad, I'm getting kicked out," and he's gonna be like, "Why are they kicking you out?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, because they need my hair shorter." Let's just say it wouldn't have gone down like that. But I love that though. But
my dad was a wise man.
I love it.
He understood that he had to love me, but if he would have said no, it wouldn't have been healthy.
Okay, but so you talked about a lot of things happening in America at that time, and obviously we've gotten to the real reason you dropped out, which was your hairstyle. You wanted the rights.
I was tired. We'd won that battle, but it was like there was nothing there for me to do, and so I dropped out. But I did go to college.
But deeper than that, right? So you have a 17-year-old that takes this little, or what most people would have considered to be an innocuous request from the school, sit through it, understand that it's wrong, or at least feel some sense of injustice towards it or about the policy. And not just, most 17-year-olds are just going to let sleeping dogs lie. But then say, hey, no, I'm actually going to make a stand. you understand that's not the normal
I do now.
response of a 17-year-old.
I do now. You know, I mean, I organized my first walkout in junior high because a teacher put a student in a closet for discipline, and we shut down the school.
I love it.
So yeah, the teacher never put anybody in the closet again. But so I learned early on that there is certain points that you have to take to the streets to get justice.
Oh my God, that's incredible. So you get out of you drop out of high school, then you start up on this path that leads you down into a steel mill, working in a steel mill. The grit, the hits, the unions. You went from Nigeria to industrial parks of the Rust Belt. You dropped out. You're staging walkouts in junior high. You just don't rest on your laurels. It's just finding a path or just doing some work. You end up becoming a union rep. What was that like, and what did that experience teach you about justice or the future the future lawyer you were going to become? Because I don't think at that point in time you knew you were going to become a lawyer yet.
No, I hadn't even thought about it. Working in the mill, and the Steelworkers Union paid for my last 2 years of college, and that's where I ultimately got my degree. Bachelor's of General Studies out of the Indiana University Gary campus, because they wouldn't let me in law school unless I had a degree, and I got my degree a week before I started at Marquette. So it was like, but it was the fight over, developing contracts. As a rep, I was representing individuals who were wrongly treated, by the company. At the time, Inland Steel, we had 22,000 union bargaining people. I was a rep in a coke plant, and that's not, you don't make cocaine there. You convert coal to coke, and coke is one of the basic. It goes in the blast furnace with iron that came from down the Lake Michigan. The barges would come in with iron ore, and they would make iron. And so I represented people that worked in the coke plant, the blast furnace, and the mill was very segregated in the sense coke plants were the worst places, dirtiest places. Top of the coke plant is very, very hot. It just smells like benzene. You test it every 6 months, for cancer. If you worked there your whole time, you probably retired and you'd be dead in 2 years after you died. So fighting for environmental conditions, we're very active. And we always had to call lawyers in Chicago, labor lawyers, to help us. And it was like, maybe we should just, why don't we become a lawyer? So a couple of us started thinking about going to law school. And then in '83, they shut down my plant. And I sort of knew it was going to happen. Coke and iron was, they're making it in Brazil, at that time period. Anyway, it was ancient technology, so I knew I was going to be out of a job. So they shut down my plant, and then I was, 29, married, and a 5-year-old daughter, and I had to figure out what I was going to do. And so law school was it.
Prior to that, were there any lawyers in your family? Had you been exposed?
On my father's mother's side, there were some lawyers in Iowa, but not immediately. And my dad was a preacher. His brother was a doctor. So in that sense, there were no lawyers.
Oftentimes, there is that moment, even before you become a lawyer, you take the steps to where in childhood someone sees something in you. At least for me, that was part of my story. But long before I ever knew I was going to have a career in law, I never had any interest in going. I was going to go to med school. I was going to become a doctor like my father. And there's oftentimes someone says innocuously or maybe in a maze, hey, that child's going to be a lawyer someday. did you ever have that in this, between, all of your action oriented deep sense of let's fight against the injustices that have been dealt. I mean, I'm assuming if you did that over your hairstyle in high school, I can only imagine what you did as a child growing up.
I think later on, after I'd been a rep for a couple of years, my dad may have said, if you're representing people, you like this, as law an option. But I actually really liked working and representing people and living for people. It was very meaningful just doing that. And working hard has honor and integrity.
Yeah,
so now it's cleaner. My work now, it's cleaner and I make more money.
Yeah, but what's fascinating is that in a lot of very important ways, you were already an attorney, even prior to become one, just without a degree. Meaning, if you think about what the profession's supposed to be about, right? You were advocating for people, translating complex rules, and oftentimes finding solutions without necessarily having as much leverage, right? Fighting powerful interests. In a way, that is the law at its rawest form.
I agree.
If you think about it. And then there comes a moment where everything changes in 1984. Like you said, your plant shuts down. It's a story, I think, that's played out across America and in different industries until this day. For you said it wasn't going to be the end of your life. You had responsibilities. You had to make things happen. And so you go on law school to get this degree. Now, when deciding you were going to go to law school, did you have a sense of what you were going to do with a law degree after law school?
I think it was after I took my first torts class. Because when I was in the mill, one of the classes I took was political science.
Okay.
One of the assignments was reading Marbury. And that was the first time I really fell in love with the law. This decision that, right, 9 people decide that they ultimately have the right to decide what the law is. And in the course of that, losing the case inside the case, right? Justice Marshall had a long view of the court and injustice. And so I fell in love with that. When I went to law school, I thought I'd do labor law. But labor law at that time was, so much of it was unions defending unions against claims made by their members. And it was like, I'm not interested. I took torts, this idea that you represent individuals and their interests and their integrity, whether it's emotional distress, personal injury, of righting wrongs. And then when you talk about constitutional torts, civil rights cases, fighting for the individual in the context and then moving the law to try to make it fairer, then I fell in love with it. And then I wanted to do that.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
Since 1986, Wilmick has supported Wisconsin's legal professionals with tailored insurance solutions. Backed by a team of legal and risk experts, Wilmick understands the evolving challenges lawyers face as they structure deals, manage risk, and help clients meet business goals. Wilmick's involvement in the legal community ensures trusted, relevant protection for today's legal landscape.
Hi, Russell Nicolay here with Nicolay Law, Accident and Injury Lawyers. If you have clients that have been injured, my office would love the opportunity to help them get compensated and get their life back on track. We handle referrals and co-counsel relationships on injury cases all across Wisconsin.
Thank you. And now back to the Bottom Up Podcast.
Yeah, and it's interesting though how there has been this consistency as I think about your career and even dating back to some of the stories you talked about and the things that continuously drive you obviously now you're more profoundly aware of what those things are. So, for example, in all the things that you do, there's a sense of, right and wrongs, fighting for the little guy, a sense of, injustices are not just meant to be experienced, but someone ought to do something about them. There is this very can-do feel that drives all of your advocacy in the cases that you take and arenas you appear in. When did you realize? I mean, because again, we're talking about your story now, right? You could sort of take a look at it, but within that journey, when did you realize, like, hey, that's my calling. Like, that's who I am. That's what I am to the world. That's what I am in the spaces I'm in, and I'm going to wear it.
I mean, I think it came probably the first year. I clerked at the Seventh Circuit right out of law school. Mm-hmm. And what I learned there was that the law is whatever three people say it is in terms of panels of three. I still remember my first oral argument. Judge Coffey handed me a card. It was a blank white card. It just said affirm. And I remember walking back thinking, wow, there are many, many ways to affirm this case. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote it the way I wanted to affirm it. And the judge liked the draft. 20 drafts later, and then it's circulated. But then all of a sudden, it's there, and there's a decision. And I realized the law wasn't a mystery, and you have to be creative. And I say this to brand new lawyers and lawyers that have been out as long as I have been, that if you don't approach the law in terms of what should it be and create it, you miss the whole point. The law is designed to change and make things right. I mean, if in a democracy, if you believe in a republic where it's for the people, where you have a vibrant middle class, right? That law, that legal infrastructure that we live in and build every day, has to put limits on power, and it has to give people without power access. But you have to write and think that way. I think too many lawyers are not courageous and dogmatic and limit where they can go. So I think
you think the fact that at times a lot of law school training can be so formulaic that it strips away aspects of creativity, you think that has anything to do with it? Because one of the first things that happens when you're in law school, for example, is the fact that you start writing a certain way. Your writing does lose some creativity to it, which I understand, right? It's to strip you, because the average person, and even as children, we all grow up with a very creative, expanded mindset, right? And I say that as we grow older, the challenge is to maintain that childlike curiosity, because if anything, our elasticity of our minds is lessened, right? And that also comes with it, it strips off your creativity. And so by the time you're in law school, right, there is a way, right, to think, right? So the modus for thinking, or the way of thinking, becomes also indicative, or at least I would almost say confused as the work product. So what I mean by that is, I think of Iraq, right, which is a formula for how to write, to think through an issue, right? Issue, rule, analysis, and the conclusion, right? That's a framework for teaching, for thinking. But oftentimes that framework also then becomes what the output should be, which oftentimes, if you read it, if you follow that rule to a T, you start to lose other aspects of your creative writing, right? Because the rule is, what's the rule, right? And what you just said that's important is, in thinking of creativity, and I just thought about it on the spot, maybe when we teach Iraq, or when we teach associates or lawyers are taught that our part shouldn't just be, what's the rule? It's what's the rule, what should it be, and what could it be? because because that way, right? Ultimately, the work product or the way you think through it becomes a little bit more creative. So, do you think there is an element of how lawyers are taught, or how law school students are being socialized, or taught to write, or taught to think, that's leading to the production of probably less creative lawyers?
I think law schools have changed just even in my lifetime in terms of they've always been responsible for producing lawyers to serve the public. But I think more now than when I started. I mean, I took torts, and Garrity was the professor. Mm-hmm. He's brilliant, but he was very conservative. Frankly, I mean, I did very well in his classes. He never talked to me until I shaved my goatee. Right? I shaved my goatee, and I'm in the third year, and he said, "Mr. Thomsen." I said, "What?" And he said, "Come to my office." I mean, I've had him for 3 years. And he says, "Where would you like to work?" And I said, "Wow." And I mean, he gave me the recommendation to coffee, got me on the Seventh Circuit. But
yeah.
He said, "Well, now that you've shaved, now I know that you're mature and you're ready to do it." And it was like, wow. I mean, it's really sort of mind-boggling. But I think there was, and I say this because it was very conservative, but he also sent me to Judge Coffey, who was very conservative, and Coffey knew I was a steelworker, but he was like, "Okay, do the work." Mm-hmm. I'm concerned that law schools now limit and train lawyers just to be another cog in the wheel, mm-hmm. and rather than being creative, like we're professionals, we know the legal infrastructure. It's our job, whether you do corporate, family, of making it a more just society. Mm-hmm. And I mean, you have to do that. It's not just to serve whatever corporation you represent. Mm-hmm. I mean, as a profession, we take an oath to the Constitution for a more perfect union. You have to do that. Mm-hmm. If you're going to be true to your license, true to your oath, you have to do that. And I think too many lawyers forget that. But I think part of that is that lawyers do well generally in American society. People like to play golf, they like to travel. We've become a very, very self-indulgent mm-hmm. world, right? I mean, and we're more callous now than we were in the 70s.
Mark, I know that's something that's true. I look up to you a lot, and I remember a very specific case of you infusing that creativity that you talk about. I think it involved a wrongful death case. We were involved with my firm was involved in that matter, representing another victim. It arose from an auto crash involving a sheriff who wasn't paying attention or was on his phone, and he ran a red light, I think stoplight, and slammed into this car. My client survived. Your client did not.
Right. Caesar Stinson is my client.
Yes, and I remember, so the negligence part of it and the wrongful death part of it wasn't the hardest part of the case, because the negligence was clear, and obviously we had this statute, right? That sort of caps, it caps damages, and so you now have this. You have a very tragic situation. A father, who is now, whose family is now left to live and fend without him, and the law's got us pigeonholed into this box where we're trying to figure out if someone anticipated or appreciated their death, just so you could go beyond the cap limits and what that's worth. And you put forth a theory that had never been done before, which was that there are some levels of recklessness, and when done under the color of law, that should rise to that of a constitutional civil rights violation. And I remember because you sent me that, we talked about it on the phone. I'm like, what are you talking about? And because I never thought about it. And I said, hey, could you please send me your brief? And I read that brief. And in that brief, it becomes quite clear that, number one, this is a lawyer who thinks about not the law as it is, but also as it should be. And number two, right, this idea that the law should be used as a tool for good. And to operate under this arbitrary cap when the damages here are so much more, this just can't be justice. And even if we don't have, there has to be something within the law. And you made a very compelling argument. I think you may have achieved some moderate success. I think.
Well, I mean,
the lower court levels.
At the district court level, our claim was ratified. Right? The judge said you can bring your civil rights claim that gets around the caps. Now, qualified immunity is this doctrine, right, that prevents claims going forward if the right isn't clearly established. That is a right of appeal to the Seventh Circuit. This case is pending right now at the Seventh Circuit. It's been pending for a year and a half. And we're going to find out whether or not, under the law, claims like this exist, where you had an officer that was convicted of a crime, right? So the object there was can we assist the DA in getting the person prosecuted? Because then you've established beyond a reasonable doubt certain elements of your civil claim, which means you don't have to prove them again, right? in your own claim. But you also get around the cap. And I think it's the logical extension of due process. And ironically, that concept came from a case written by Judge Coffey, right about the time I was, clerking with him. And so it was when I argued the case at the Seventh Circuit, it was the first time I'd been back since I clerked there. I looked at Judge Coffey's picture up on the wall, and I said, because one of the judges on the panel sat with Coffey, and I said, well, Judge Coffey said this, this is an established right, and everybody knew this is a really, really conservative person. So this is not a radical left idea.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping. I'm still hoping.
And now, a word from our sponsors. Networking can be an important part of your practice, and there's no better place to network than the Wisconsin Solo and Small Firm Conference. Find out more at wispar.org/WSSFC.
The wrong business structure can cost your clients time, money, and legal headaches. The Wisconsin Business Entities Handbook is your essential guide, covering taxes, liability, management, and filings, so you can give your clients the right advice at the right time. Get your copy today at wispar.org/books to help your clients make informed decisions with confidence.
Thank you. And now back to the Bottom Up Podcast.
Well, regardless of what happens, right, what really struck me was to see someone who's practiced law for such a long time, seen a lot of things, right, but still be willing to move the boundaries and come up with creative new ways and new ideas to think about the law. And that was quite inspirational. And I'll tell you this, that moment informs a lot of what I think about. That moment would lead to me bringing certain cases, especially as it relates in the municipal setup and due process and what due process is. So for example, in the city of Milwaukee, I brought so many cases that have, I would say, transformed the way due process is given to applicants for license and business licenses, because the Fourth Amendment says those are constitutional property interests, right? And every one of those cases was brought after I heard this from the other more experienced lawyer. This is how it's always been.
Always. And
I would say why. And no one would be able to give me a compelling argument. For example, I'm like, why isn't an older person who's testifying about my client's license, why aren't they being subjected to cross-examination? If it's a due process hearing and you're going to consider that evidence, I'm required to. Why aren't they sworn And like, that's how it's always been. What's the pre-established burden of proof? We don't have to. It doesn't have to be pre-calibrated. And you ask, well, why? It's like, well, that's how it's always been done. And so in those cases, I think I would literally go, well, what would Mark Thomsen do in a situation like this?
That's being kind. There are a lot, like, here.
I'm being very honest. I call you probably once every 2 to 3 weeks to ask your counsel on a whole lot of things. And what I really think it's important that lots of lawyers, because there are lots of lawyers who feel very stuck in a rut. Yeah. They feel like they are just drones. They don't have any creativity in the work, and they don't know how to infuse that creativity in the work that they're doing, which leads to lots of people who are very disillusioned, because we're at a time where I believe we need more lawyers who are engaged and who can find some beauty and creativity in the work that they do to stay engaged. So I think it is inspirational when someone who's been doing this for as long as you have been doing it can still look for ways to be as creative and find that passion and still have the law be used as a tool for good. And that's the reason I wanted to share that story, because you wouldn't talk about it like that.
No, I wouldn't. Our law degree is such a powerful tool. It is completely underutilized. If you're a union rep, you have some power. But they give you a law degree, and you get to go into a courthouse, and you get to write a brief to say what the world should look like. Mm. That is so much power. And we just don't use it. I mean, we're wasting our power as a collective group of lawyers. I mean, seriously.
For those listening, looking for either in law school or newer lawyers or lawyers mid-careers or at the end of their careers, looking to either stay creative or become creative in the work that they do, or maintain their creativity, what are some tips? There are things they should be doing. So the common one in law school is, hey, try to read fictional books, just at least for writing, right? Just because that keeps your writing still a little creative and interesting.
Right. I'm right now trying to figure out how am I going to use AI? Okay. I mean, I think that's going to be the challenge. I think the lawyers that can use AI and to be creative, because that AI can make us go so fast. Right. I mean, what used to take weeks to digest. I'm getting ready for a Seventh Circuit argument. You just pop up all the cases. AI will do all the summaries, I mean, so I go to the Seventh Circuit with a binder with all the cases by all the judges on all the issues. You go down there, you find out who your 3-panel member is, you grab those cases, and then you're talking direct to the panel. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's just a simple little use of it. So I think that's going to be revolutionary. But going back to this, I think you said it and I didn't say it. It's what is the right thing? What's the moral and ethically right thing to do? Mm-hmm. And what is truth? I think right now in America, we have a crisis of truth. Trials are the search for truth. Mm-hmm. And that has to be a focus.
I also think it is important to note what you just said about AI in the legal industry, because obviously that's all the jazz, right? That's what everyone's talking about. I just think it is beautiful to people to understand that the viewpoints on AI isn't necessary. You can't just say it's a new age versus an old school kind of thing. But again, even in your comment, you sort of represent that expanded mindset, right? To see someone, again, I would say, I don't mean to be generalistic in my comment here, but I would say a lot of the pushback you get or folks do get in our industry as it relates to AI are coming from more experienced attorneys, right? So I think it is.
Here, we all know this. It's hard to change, right? When you're comfortable, you don't like the change because it makes you uncomfortable. But I mean, I love, life should be, I said this, right? It's a blink. you need to make it shine. And so it's like jumping into fresh water and, swimming in a new place. Certainly it's not boring. It's harder because you got to go try to deal with teaching your brain something new. But, people are going to do it. And the lawyers that don't learn how to use it, they're going to go out of business. That's all.
I've had a very unique perspective, at least. I'm not, obviously it's got a lot of capabilities. And I think when everyone sees these tools, they look at them from a very protectionist lens, right? If you realize the conversation is always like, is it going to replace us? I don't know why.
It's not going to replace us. It just makes us be able to do more.
Yeah.
And allows us more free time to be creative about using things.
But I oftentimes say, even if it does, so what? Because this is right. Because if you think about it, if you think that's going to that's going to replace you, right? Whatever it is, and it does it better and it does it faster, why should I have a problem with that? I know it's not going to, right? Because to a large extent, it will make certain things that we do a lot better and a lot easier. But there is this idea, it's very rooted in protectionism in a sense, right? If there's some way to do something better, you don't have doctors who once upon a time had to perform surgeries without anesthesia. Then go, hey, now we got anesthesia or whatever it might be. Go, hey, is it going to replace this? Like, if it does remove a certain aspect or create or remove redundancies in the systems, so what, right?
Well, correct. So the question though is at the macro scale, who's benefiting, and is it the majority of people that are going to benefit or not? I just read an article. Lyft is starting, non-driving rides, no driver rides in Europe. It's going to devastate taxi drivers, right? That may be, okay, now I'm going to miss talking to the taxi driver because you can't, you're not going to be talking to a car. You're not going to have the tour of where you're going. It's cheaper. Okay, so if we want cheap, but we have to then find something meaningful for people to do.
I'm glad you took it there. My so what commentary is not a flippant response to.
I didn't think so, but I just wanted to make sure it was.
But it's to get to the next question, right? Because we keep thinking and acting like this is just some inevitability that we have no control over. We keep thinking it's just happening to us. So what I mean by that is, if we as a society say it is important for our socialization, for us to be able to interact with taxi drivers, right? We can create laws and we can create rules that would prevent for the eradication of such jobs, right? All I'm trying to say is, there is, especially as it relates to tech, there is this sense of inevitability and people feeling like they do not have control. And we're seeing this even with the governance or lack thereof of AI and all that stuff, because one of my biggest concerns with AI, and this goes beyond just what it's good for, it's a more philosophical one, right? So and I think this will become more pronounced as the generations go on. Again, this is just my doomsday analysis. Hopefully it doesn't come true. When critical thinking is outsourced to an algorithm, right? And as the generations progress, you now have people using AI to critically think. That means, right, the outputs and people will be socialized in how they learn to think will be based off of an algorithm that is controlled by a private entity. So the very idea of thought and critical analysis is now controlled by for-profit companies. That means, at a deeper level, because we've already seen this with news, we've seen what happens when the purveyors and providers of news decide they want people to think a certain thing for whatever purpose it might be. We've seen what social media has been able to do in terms of turning people, and people are creating divisions, right? And all of that stuff, and the tools are just doing what the tools are supposed to do, right? AI is neither good nor bad, it's a tool, right? But I think and that's a question no one's asking, right? Because right now, and the calculator analogy isn't quite right. I still need to know that 5 plus 2 is equals to 7. I'm not going to go to a calculator and say, hey, there's a 5, there's a plus sign, and there's a 2. What could it be? Is this an equation?
But, you know, I want to make it a little more practical.
Okay.
And I want to.
Mine was too esoteric.
No. Because I think lawyers and judges and the law has to play a crucial role in this whole change. The law and legal decisions have to say, this is true, and here is the story. And so what is written, and I want to talk about, we started Nigeria, I want to sort of talk, I think in terms of race in America and the attack on DEI and the abolition of civil rights as I knew it in my lifetime, gone in 100 days, should be crucial to every lawyer, every judge. And to my white friends and lawyers, super important. When you write a brief and the story is about race, you have to tell the story. Mm-hmm. You have to tell the truth. Okay, you just can't whitewash American life. Mm-hmm. AI will have that ability, right? Yeah. So the law and lawyers and our commitment to the truth and justice have to play this role. That has to be the check. Mm. And right now you see that battle raging in decisions all over the country. What are facts? And, especially on all these immigration rights. I mean, are we at a war that you can justify the use of soldiers in your own communities, right? Yeah. Are we is every city going to become a little, LA, right? We got U.S. soldiers stationed there now. I mean, is that what we want as a people? Here, if lawyers and judges aren't writing about it, it will be gone, okay? Because AI is not going to write the law, right? AI is not going to replace the Supreme Court and our judges. AI will not replace us. And so if we're going to have a legal framework for hope and truth, it has to be us. And this is the time to be as courageous as we can, because if we whitewash what's going on, then we are just violating our oath as a lawyer.
And now, a word from our sponsors. Networking can be an important part of your practice, and there's no better place to network than the Wisconsin Solo and Small Firm Conference. Find out more at wispar.org/WSSFC. In these uncertain economic times, the State Bar of Wisconsin wants to make sure that you and your practice have the best available tools. Ultimate Pass and Books Unbound are available for purchase using 6-month installment plans. Contact our customer service team at 1-800-728-7788 for more information. Thank you, and now back to the Bottom Up Podcast.
I want to take a slightly different turn into your work, some of your other, some of the things you do, some of your civic work. From after you deal with these high-profile civil rights cases, and then you go to serving on the Wisconsin Elections Commission, and I look, and if anything is clear, it's clear that you're drawn to friction points in our society.
Well, I was asked to go there, and I said yes. So it was an opportunity.
So how's that been like? What's that like? Because you get sued a lot lately.
In my official capacity.
In your official capacity, right. in the last 8 years.
I don't even know how many times, right? So. Fortunately, I don't have...
Let's talk about, a lot of people have heard about the Wisconsin Elections Committee, but what does it, Wisconsin Elections Commission, I'm sorry. What does it do, and what should people know about it? And what do you do on that commission?
The commission is designed as a partisan structure that six of us, 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats, with a nonpartisan staff. I think when it was created, nobody thought it would succeed. And I think the commissioners have tried to work together to make it effective, to allow everybody that votes, that we count those votes. And we have been very successful at holding fundamentally fair elections. It's 9 years now. It'll be 10 years. The commission will be 10 years old next year, next June. So, I view my role in that as trying to make sure that we keep open access, allow everybody to vote that can vote, make it as easy as possible to vote, and then count them fairly and be consistent on that. And I think the facts and the truth is that it has been, but it's been, we have a fake elector as one of the commissioners, right? So that's always a very interesting thing. But if people are paying attention, there are a lot of 5-1 votes. And, so the fake elector sort of isolated even.
That role, or at least your contributions to the commission, how does that fit into the overall story of Mark Thomsen in terms of Mark Thomsen, the civil rights attorney, Mark Thomsen, the dad, Mark Thomsen, the guy who grew up, in Africa.
Yeah.
He moved.
And then Mark Thomsen that does med-mal, and civil rights cases are just one piece. I look at it. We only get paid if we win. Not many lawyers do that, right? You've got to jump off the cliff and believe you're going to fly before you hit the ground, and then you just have to win. So that's a motivating factor. I just wanted to touch on that. But how does this fit in? We only have lawyers within our framework of a constitutional democracy. The Election Commission allows people to participate. It only works if we have responsible citizens, educated citizens that make rational decisions in the interests of the majority of people and not just a few. And to be part of that process and help and try to facilitate that it's just a privilege.
So in your role on the commission, you have to, part of it, I would say part of what the commission does is clarify or make rules that are supposed to be implemented, right, to ensure that the election runs smoothly and
the commission actually is very limited in one sense, right?
So what does it do?
The legislature creates the rules that govern elections.
Okay.
The commission then implements and makes sure the elections follow the law. Within that, right, it's an administrative agency. We all know that laws always have holes or don't answer every question. And so how do we intervene? We spent 2 years developing observer rules. It took us 2 years, almost got gutted. But now we have uniform rules, administrative rules, statewide on observers' rights and the voters' rights. And that was it was a consensus. And overall, I think the rules are going to work great.
In that role, have you experienced trying to figure out a way to ask this? Well, let's scratch that so you don't get sued.
You should ask it. I don't know how I could answer and get sued.
No, one of the questions, so you witnessed and you experienced firsthand the debacle with the fake electors in Wisconsin at a very crucial time. And you have to understand that as someone who, as a naturalized citizen of this country, and as someone who holds this country to in a very high standing, and I think it should never be lost that to point out the craziness doesn't necessarily mean you stop loving the country, you don't appreciate the country. It was a very odd thing to witness because for me personally, when I think back to all of that leading up to January 6th and all that nonsense, there was a point where you go, is this country really what it says it is? And I know for a lot of people and for certain classes of people in this country and certain races, and some of my friends are like, oh, dude, you drank the Kool-Aid. You really thought so? And I really did. And I still believe that this is a pretty special place. That there are very few places where my story, your story is possible. But there was this shock of this, in the words of Chinua Achebe, things falling apart and feeling like the center could not hold. And obviously, after the chaos, at different levels, we have to pick up the rubbles, and in one of those places where those rubbles had to be picked up and sort of made sense of in terms of how we go forward as a people. In the state of Wisconsin would have been the work that you guys do at the Wisconsin Election Commission and the staff and the folks who ensure that our elections run the way they're supposed to run. Going through all of that, what do you make of the Constitution, our democracy, and our rights as they currently stand, and where do we go from here? Because there was a lot of, what do we do now? The emperor has no clothes, there are lots of holes, and we can't even agree on what happened. At times I wonder if that was just a dream when I hear certain people talk about it. But for you, it wasn't. So what's been your take on that? Where has that left you?
I think rooted in this idea of looking for the truth. The schism in the United States is not new, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, the whole, Black Lives Matter, the 1619 Project, it was all designed to say, look, here is the truth. This is our history. Understand it. We have to do that. This battle is not new, right? I mean, some people want to take us back to 1859. I don't want to go there. But we've had this battle in our country from day one. I mean, I grew up being taught that America was the greatest democracy in the world. And look, black folks were slaves. That's not a democracy. Women didn't vote until the 1900s. I mean, we just started to become a democracy after the women had the right to vote. So we need to think about the facts, and then, that's relatively new. Mm-hmm. So as a society, we have to go fight for it. And I think this is, again, why I think lawyers have, because we took an oath to the Constitution, we have a special role in society to be vocal on this, to form a more perfect union. What does that mean? And how does your case make that happen? Mm-hmm. Does it heal? Does it put people together? Do we create more opportunities, or do we limit closed doors and isolate and denigrate people? I mean, that's the essence of what we do.
Why do you think there were so many lawyers who were willing to be used, or who were so willing to be a part of these efforts? I mean, we know. I mean, objectively, we could say lots of lawyers lost their licenses, right? People were reprimanded, and also, in a different iteration, we hear about, law firms being attacked and law firms cutting deals, and some of them even willingly so. Why are we so eager and willing participants at times to bring upon the demise, or at least weakening the systems that we have to operate within? What is there something because I never really understood, when people would say, hey, I don't like lawyers. After that whole period, I'm like, oh, I could see how, because it was really hard for a lot of my friends who were not as as Leonard. They would say it can't be a crazy position. They have top lawyers representing them, even in the fake electors case, and you have to answer like, oh no, because absolutely, there's a rule of law and there are two sides, but there were some indefensible positions that one would say to even take them would be a betrayal of the oath, and yet there still were willing participants and lawyers willing to take on that charge.
We're just human beings like everybody else, right? Some of us are impacted by money. Some of us are impacted by greed. Some of us are, openly white supremacists that develop a law. Slavery was legal. Mm-hmm. Morally repugnant. Should never have been legal, but it was legal. So, the fact that we have lawyers that say certain things should be legal that I fundamentally disagree with is not a new concept. There's always been lawyers that have been, on the opposite side. But this is a human endeavor. This is who we are as a people, and we're wrestling with it. And so I don't expect all the lawyers to show up. I'm hoping that more white lawyers show up, and pretty soon.
Well, I think what was a little unique about that fight, especially if you think about 2020 and attempts to sow doubts into the election.
That's not over.
System.
It's starting again.
But I think in every, and I know this may sound as distasteful as it might sound, in every other fight to a large extent, right? You have lawyers talking about using the current rules or issues within the system. These are willing participants that are going to the very heart of the system, which to a large extent, real or unintended, right? Democracy, right? In the past, it wasn't about who had rights to vote. It wasn't about the right to vote. It was about, okay, who should have it and who shouldn't have it. We have lawyers that are openly taking the positions of saying, hey, we will do the bidding for a king. We will do the biddings, if the outcome isn't right, then the system doesn't work.
That's not new.
Okay.
That's not new. President Eisenhower was a Republican, a general, who thought the right thing to do was tax the wealthy at 90%. It helped create a middle class in America. Nobody talks about that. That's factual truth. So we have to go get the facts, arm ourselves. And I don't expect, a unified bar. I'm just hoping for, 60% saying that, to form a more perfect union is consistent with where we're trying to go. Right? I do not want to go back. And what we have gone back fundamentally on race and the impacts are going to be huge. When you deconstruct and you say that you're not going to, what was one of the first ones? Johnson had the executive order, right? We talked about this, where you have to give black folks money. They're entitled to get some of this government business. You have to share the money. It's the first thing that, that Trump did. One of the first things. It's gone. Not a president has touched that since 1965. That's a direct attack at the middle class, a direct attack against African Americans. And white tolerance of it is just unacceptable. To say that it's just okay is outrageous. But that's the fight.
If you were asked by an aspiring young lawyer who is either in law school or hasn't begun that journey but wants to become one, and they ask you, Mark, does it even matter? Why should I become a lawyer? Given today's state of affairs, given the fact that, the laws don't seem to apply, they never really have, but I think it is more pronounced. They don't apply equally. The system is under attack. If in very important regards, there is a lot of fear. Lawyers are being threatened. I think it's a very dangerous time at times to be, in certain regards, in being a lawyer. Judges are being arrested in very outrageous ways. And it just doesn't seem like it's working. It doesn't feel like you could even use the law as much as a tool for good. So if you had to answer that question, Mark, why should we even bother? Does the profession still matter? What would you say?
I think it matters more now than probably at any other point in time of my life. There is a great beauty in fighting a Goliath. And if you're David, this is the time to get the law degree and go design a just system. This is the absolutely best time to do it. It's going to be a great fight. This is like joy in my heart. I hate to say that, right? But if you want to fight, this is a fight. This is, world-class fight. Why not be there?
Mark, I want to thank you for your time today. Your story is a powerful reminder that the most effective advocates are often the ones, that can rise beyond what's in front of them to seek a better future, in a future not as it currently is or as it's been said it's going to be, but as it should be. And if anything, I think that's my takeaway, to keep on looking to the law and looking at society as we construct it, and not just something happening to us, but something that we do have some control over. And to the extent that we do, we should constantly be asking the question, what should it be? While acknowledging what it is, but asking, what should it be? Thank you very much, Mark. I really appreciate your time here today. I appreciate your insights, and thanks for elevating all of us around here. I feel a lot more inspired.
It was
by
a lot
this.
of fun.
Thank you very much. All right.
Appreciate it.
Until next time.
Thanks for listening to our podcast. If you have a topic you'd like us to explore, let us know. I'm your host, Emil Obviagele, and we'll catch you next time.